And welcome back. We're in episode 6 of Jesus, Dead or Alive. Imagining things. A second attack claims that the so-called sightings of Jesus were nothing more than hallucinations, brought on by the devastating trauma his followers experienced following his death. This is easy to claim but impossible to confirm. Hallucinations conform to certain laws, none of which applies in this case. As medical expert Professor A. Rendell Short puts it, the resurrection appearances break down every known law of visions. Firstly, hallucinations are usually associated with people who are at least neurotic, if not actually psychotic. But those who claim to have seen Jesus included not only distressed women, but the hot-tempered John, the aggressive Peter, an ordered civil servant like Matthew, a brilliant intellectual like Paul, and a stubborn skeptic like Thomas. There is no hint in their stories that they were neurotic or psychotic. Secondly, hallucinations usually take place in favorable circumstances and at times when the person concerned is wrapped in sentimental feelings or fond memories. Yet hardly any of the reported appearances were in places where Jesus had spent time with his followers. He appeared in a garden, in a home, on a roadside, out in the country, on the seashore, and on a hillside, and at many different times of the day. Thirdly, hallucinations are linked to a person's own subconscious ideas and are therefore intensely individual. But the Bible tells us of Jesus meeting not only with individuals, but with 2, 3, 7, and even over 500 at the same time. Many people can truthfully tell of having seen something unusual and even unique, but for over 500 people to have an identical hallucination at the same time is unheard of. A friend of mine speaking in a school assembly of 200 students suddenly produced a pair of scissors and cut the headmaster's tie in pieces by prior arrangement. My friend then turned to the assembly and said something like this: "Imagine that on the way home you meet a friend who is not here this morning and you tell her that you saw the speaker at assembly chop up the headmaster's tie. She would think you were pulling her leg. But suppose that 3 other classmates met her and told her the same thing, and then on the following day, all 30 students in your class told her they saw it happen. Now imagine that all 200 of you in this hall told her the same story. Surely she would then have no reason for doubting? Over 500 people saying they had seen Jesus alive after death is powerful evidence that they were telling the truth." Referring to these 500 people, Paul added, "most of whom are still alive," 1 Corinthians 15:6. People did not have to take Paul's word for it. Over half of this large crowd could be interrogated, and every person would have told the same story. The problem for the skeptic is not to explain why so many people had this hallucination, but why there was not a single person in that large crowd who did not have it. The American theologian J. Gresham Machen, a firm believer in the resurrection, once wryly suggested that if all the people who claimed they had seen Jesus alive after death were hallucinating, it would mean that if there had been a good neurologist for Peter and others to consult, there would never have been a Christian church. Wishful thinking. A third attack suggests that these witnesses so badly wanted Jesus back that they were overwhelmed by wishful thinking and treated their imagination as if it were reality. Countless people still talk of seeing Elvis Presley alive, even though he died in 1977. The Elvis Sighting Bulletin Board has a website which claims to keep visitors aware of his movements, so they will not be alarmed by seeing the King at their local supermarket or swimming in a neighbor's pool. The resurrection of Jesus is a different matter altogether, not least because his followers did not expect him to come alive again. When the first woman went to the tomb, it was to embalm him, not to embrace him. When Mary told the disciples that she had seen Jesus, they would not believe it. Mark 16:11. One of them, Thomas, went further. "Unless I see in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my finger into the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will never believe." John 20:25. Not much wishful thinking there. Mark even tells us that on another occasion Jesus appeared to them as they were having a meal, and he rebuked them for their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they had not believed those who saw him after he had risen. Mark 16:14. Several weeks later, even when most of his followers had become completely convinced, some doubted. Matthew 28:17. None of these incidents sound like people jumping to emotionally triggered conclusions. Paul reports seeing Jesus a long time after the initial emotion surrounding the resurrection had died down, and at a time when he was convinced that the whole thing was a pack of lies. Not only was the resurrection of Jesus the last thing he expected, it was the last thing he wanted, so he can hardly be charged with wishful thinking that eventually led to hallucination. Those first Christians were utterly skeptical until they faced a fact that could not be denied.